Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 93 of the Home Games Podcast. I'm Yazeed, and this is Joseph.
Hello, my name is Joseph, and today is Monday, October 25th, 2021. This week, we're talking about my draft pull request. I finally got up a draft pull request for all of the rewrite stuff I've been doing on Squisher. So Yazeed and I have some thoughts on that. And then I had some thoughts on a new dashboard redesign because I'm the king of feature creep. And this was just something I wanted to think of, or I've been thinking about for a while. So I just wanted to kind of run some ideas by you. But
I think like 2 podcasts ago you said, and I quote, the dashboard needs to be redesigned, but we can do that next year. But all right, take your shot. It's
okay.
Cool.
Well, these are like preliminary thoughts. But by that, of course, I mean I'm going to build everything I talk about, and it's not at all. I don't plan. Continue. I just do, But yeah, that's basically it. We have the pull request, and then I also just wanted to talk about a video about the Facebook outage that happened a couple weeks ago that I thought was really well done, just in terms of like talking about technical stuff without a super in-depth background from the audience. So just kind of wanted to talk about that, I guess. But yeah, that was pretty much it for the topics.
No, okay. Well, do you want to start with that video then, and then we'll go from there?
Yeah, did you get a chance to watch it? This is Ben Eater on YouTube, for anybody curious. He does really good videos on hardware and breadboards, and he does the hardcore computer stuff that I kind of wish I had. I wish I had the ability to learn. I'm just not smart enough to do hardware stuff. But he's just like, I'll do a hello world based off of like a toaster and 2 wires. Let's do this shit. Like he'll just figure out a way to make a computer and then run code on it, and he'll show you every piece of it. It's just super cool. But anyway, he had a video basically explaining DNS resolution and how the internet works, and using that as kind of a background for why Facebook was down for like 4 or 5 hours a couple weeks ago. Basically, the TLDR is that Facebook servers were inaccessible from the rest of the internet. But yeah, I guess whatever. I guess I don't really have much to say except for the fact that the way that he describes that stuff is like a good frame of reference for me to see what I want to do in terms of technical explanations for things, to be able to say, I know this like the back of my hand, and I can show you examples, and I can relate it to real world stuff, and basically making it something that the person can understand without knowing what the fuck you're actually even talking about. Anyway, Ben Eater, that dude is really good. I bought one of his like build your own computer kit that he sells. So one of these days I'll get around to making that and give like a review or something on my first thing into hardware. But yeah.
I have a couple questions on it. One, do you think that doing it in like a video medium helps him like explain stuff, like simplify things? Or because like I think a lot of for us would be writing documentation is just words, right? Or is there like takeaways for that too?
Yeah, I think like there was a good write up from an actual head of engineering or something at Facebook. They put out like a pretty good high level overview of why that stuff stopped working. So I guess that's like a good written form. But to me, the video was good because he had examples, and he would walk through. Like he basically built his own little fake internet where he's like, let's imagine I have a host over here in this subnet and a thing over here in this subnet, and they're talking through this kind of main network, whatever network dude stuff, and doing a really good job of explaining the way that it really worked, but then just showing an example in his terminal, like this can't talk to this and this is why, and it puts it all together in a way that you can't really do with documentation unless you give someone an example. And then people have to have an environment to run that stuff and kind of know what they're doing. Whereas I can just watch someone do it.
I see. And then, aside from the examples, like, was there anything particular, like the wording or anything like that? Like, how did he distill that? Because like that's not an easy thing to get across, I think, for people who don't know that much about how the internet works functionally.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's a big thing with my own background knowledge, because I kind of know how DNS stuff works because I've done some like networking stuff before. But before that, you would say, you specifically in college would tell me, oh, it's just like mail. IP addresses, it's like an address, and you tell them where the letter goes. But it's so foreign to you because you know that it's so abstracted that it means nothing, because it's not how the internet works. It's not like mail. it's so different, you know. So I think just being able to know what he's actually saying and then hearing a fuzzied up version of it makes me think it's really good for someone who doesn't understand the real thing behind it. But I might just be seeing it from my perspective, because someone like my mom can watch it and be like, oh, what's an IP address? You know, and that level of knowledge, he basically doesn't, he assumes that you have that knowledge. He assumes that you're not just like totally unaware of how the internet works, you know? So that's one thing too. But that's like I've said before, where you have to assume some sort of audience and you have to assume some sort of knowledge from that audience. You can't just explain as if they're learning everything from the first time every single time.
I got you. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, Benny, very cool.
Benny, dude. I'll check it out. I haven't seen the video yet, so I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, if you have 30 minutes, it makes you feel smarter. And people in the comments were talking about, you know, basically I took a whole class on this and this was a better explanation than any of that. And I definitely related to that because, you know, I took a whole class on that and it was a better explanation. But again, it's like I just said, where maybe it's because I took the class that I appreciated this more.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we did take that class. Now, did we take that class or did we take that class? I mean,
I don't know the difference, but I'll say that we took that class, you know?
I see. Yeah. We did do the work. We did graduate. So that counts for something.
Yeah. Did you want to talk about...
Do you want to talk about the draft poll request that you set up? Because most of my stuff is just thoughts on that.
Yeah, so... last episode 2 weeks ago, we had some early code changes that Yazeed put up into a draft pull request just to kind of read and look at, and then this past week I added more to it and kind of not finalized it, but basically made it like I had a checkpoint basically of this stuff is working, these tests are working, some of it's ugly, some of it's commented out, some of it is not finished, it's all super buggy and shitty, but the framework is there, like what things are going to be doing and what's going to be talking to what is there. So got all that stuff up, and basically the actual changes in there were the player visibility stuff. So before I had just completely ripped out the core of all of the Squisher stuff, which had this filtering for player IDs where it would have this knowledge of its state, of like the game state, and it would also know everybody's view of the state at any point. So that's something I wanted to talk about too, because I don't manage that shit well. But it's essentially this thing of I have like a source of truth. I have the real state of the world at any time, but I also have everybody's view of the world at any time for performance reasons, right? So if I know the one thing and I want to see how you see it, I don't want to have to keep calculating how you see it. I want to just be able to know this is Yazid's view, this is Joseph's view, that whole kind of thing. So basically re-implemented all that stuff, the player visibility, filtering stuff, and the code is, believe it or not, better than it used to be, even though it's not it's not very clean still. But yeah, that's
I mean, I had reviewed it and I will say it is better for sure. I could follow it much easier than I could previously.
Yeah. I also did some kind of abstraction from the way that, like I've talked about this before, but the way that the data is actually stored and transferred from the server to the client. People don't need to know that. Like, there's an interface to all this stuff for a reason. It's to abstract away the guts and the ugly byte manipulation stuff that we have. It's that stuff is meant to be abstracted. So I added a base class in the game node stuff, which I think you talked about before. Of there's internal game node, and then there's all these other game node classes that set this .node from the result of that function. It's just kind of weird. Mm-hmm. So we still do that, but it's cleaner now because they all extend this base game node class that actually has implementation of simple things like remove child, add child, so I don't need to copy paste the method in every single class like I've been doing.
Yeah, I love that. When I read that, I was like, oh, this is so nice.
Well, I love Java. Like, I love people talk shit about Java because of the wordiness and the object-oriented chunkiness and whatever, but I like classes and I like interfaces and I like abstract interfaces, whatever the fuck. I like that stuff. So I kind of went full on inheritance and stuff and just said, okay, well, I'm committing to this thing I actually like, even though it's not very JavaScripty. So anyway, did that, and then I added these hide for and show for methods in there, which are like I was just talking about in terms of player ID filtering and views and stuff. Because before, the interface was, here's a list of numbers. It represents the players that can see this specific node. If you want to remove a player node yourself, you have to like call splice on this array and then like manually set values and know it's this mix of a nice interface where I'm trying to make it nice to get into, and then when you're actually into it, I just give you a bunch of incomprehensible libraries. Once you're in it, like once you're at the front door, I start smacking you in the face with all my bullshit, which makes it hard to keep getting into it once you're at that point. So yeah, like I said, I want to have more abstraction like that, where node.hide for player ID, which just does that array stuff in the back, or show for player ID, where basically Yazeed click button, node.show for Yazeed, now a thing appears for you. Nice, relatively simple interface. Yeah, I don't know. Did you have any other thoughts on that stuff?
Not so much. I was gonna say one of the things you said right then was that you went more like Java or like class object oriented design, right? But I feel like that makes a lot of sense for this in the first place, because traditionally you wouldn't be doing this with JavaScript in the first place. You're doing this with like an object oriented programming language like C, C#, C++, Java maybe.
Well, so like that's one of those things where when I first got a job in tech, where I was officially like a programmer for money, and people around me would have conversations that were about style and conventions, and it's not so functional, or it's not declarative, it's not whatever, like fucking words that just felt like they described something that I didn't understand. Or it's like, what does it mean to be functional versus object oriented? Especially in JavaScript, where everything is supported and you can do kind of anything and whatever. And it's like, yeah, class is really an object, and it's whatever. It's just mushy in JavaScript, so it's easy to kind of blur those lines. Anyway, all I'm really saying is, yes, you're right. It is something that I guess you wouldn't regularly do in JavaScript, and it's because I don't know what you're supposed to do in JavaScript. Like I don't know what's like good or normal. I just like it works.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I like the change. Also, the thing too is it makes it easier to TypeScriptify it if things are in a rigid classes like that, because you just define some types, some interfaces, some enums.
Yeah,
and that's the other thing too. I like that there's separated files, like the shape was like the shapes, which is basically just like an enum where you take the map one way. Mm-hmm. It's like the shapes to constructor and it's constructor to shape or something like that. Mm-hmm. That file, I like that file too.
Yeah,
I think like one of the things I wanted to ask about though was, I think it's in Squisher.js maybe, but you do a lot of the same manipulations with X and Y. Mm-hmm. You'd like
to scale them.
One of the ones I remember is like how you scale and center these things. Mm-hmm. I feel like it'd be easier to just pull that out into a helper function that we call, because then we can test that piece independently. But I wasn't sure if you did that on purpose or just for like expediency. Like
just for the scaling math, you mean? Given this input.
Yeah, like a lot of those like math functions, I feel like maybe we want to just make a utility function for it.
Yeah, I guess we could. There's the functions that are declared now are scale X and scale Y, which are intended to, for people unfamiliar, basically, the game that people, like the coordinate space that a game operates in is like 0 to 100 X, Y, like a regular grid that someone would understand, and percentages and stuff. But we in the engine need to scale that down, because we need to, for example, have that frame around the screen where we can have like a home button and stuff like that. So the coordinate space of the original game is like the interface for it is 0 to 100, but in the rendering we scale it down, 20% or whatever, which is the math that we're talking about here. So we have a scale X and scale Y, which is just, pretty simple. Take like 1 minus the scale percentage over 2 or whatever the fuck the math is, and then you multiply it and spit it out. But I imagine we'll need more like math util stuff in the future, so we can probably move that out into a math thing. Now we have a scale test, which is like squisher scale, but it's not independent, just math scale, stuff. So
Yeah, part of the reason I was asking about that too is it looks super similar to a lot of the math that you did in web.
oh yeah, we probably
yeah. So I mean, just like pulling it out might be easier. I think one of the differences is that in web we look at like the viewport size too, if I remember right, to figure out how we scale it properly for the actual screen. If I don't know if that's true, I don't remember exactly.
It is because the client is getting like the scaled percentage, right? So the game says it was at 50-50, it was a little rectangle or whatever. So then on the client it gets that 50-50 as a percentage, and then it applies that to its actual dimensions on the client. So that's kind of what I mean when I say like the game doesn't exist anywhere until you render it. There is no visual state of the game, which is kind of weird. But yeah, definitely we could split that out into a common package. We have a home games common package, so we can just add that math stuff there.
Yeah, I think that would be pretty nice. I'm trying to remember if there was anything else I wanted to ask about. I guess like some of the other things I was going to ask about were, I think I brought this up before, and we probably said we liked it, but we just didn't want to implement it. But like stuff like a prettier or something like that, like it's a code formatter on there, as well as TypeScript. I started using it at my new job. Also, this is like a sidebar. Everything my new job does is open source, so I can talk about it.
Oh, nice! I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, like anybody can just commit to those repos, or not commit to those repos, but open a pull request for those repos. So if anybody really desperately needed to know what I do, I'm sure there's a way to find me. But
also, your incredibly unique name. Anybody can Google.
Yeah, that's the other part of it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So everything's open source, so I can say whatever I want. But yeah, so they use a prettier there, and it's kind of nice, especially with VS Code, because you can just run the prettier on everything, and it enforces formatting. The other thing is that I'm seeing what they do is they have a ton of hooks that run in GitHub. Like they have hooks for a bunch of stuff, like including accessibility tests. So like people like visually impaired, audible impaired, they run like accessibility tests against that. And I know that we probably won't have to worry about that for at least a while, because I mean we're still building like the fundamental portions of it. But I mean like having something like that set up might be kind of nice too. Yeah.
Does Prettier have like I guess how configurable is Prettier?
I'm pretty sure Prettier is quite configurable. I think it takes in just like a linting configuration file, but I've not set up a Prettier myself, so we would have to figure that out. But I'm pretty sure it's quite configurable. They use like spaces, like their indentation is 2 spaces for indentation, very Python. So I know like, and the Prettier formatter there formats it down to that. It's like I can tab my stuff in tabs, but it'll get changed into spaces.
Nice. Yeah, I definitely like those kind of tools. I like the ones that will modify your code for you, but it's just like, hey, we noticed your spacing is inconsistent here, and we just fix it for you, because fuck it, like we obviously know how to fix this. You define that your spaces are this, and so whatever, it just works. I guess the downside is that I don't like arguing about styling stuff. I think this is really only a problem at like real jobs when people, I guess have a different kind of investment. Yeah. But I don't ever want to be in a conversation where I'm just like, oh man, it needs to be curlies on the same line or curlies on the new line. It's just whatever the best thing is, whatever the standard is, like just fuck it. Because there's one for Python that I like called Black, where it's like no configuration, just run it and it makes it correct. And especially in Python, it's nice because it's just the spacing needs to be consistent and whatever. So I like that kind of stuff, just like one and done. I don't want to have to deal with it or think about it.
I'm Prettier comes with a default, which I think is like the standard for whoever made Prettier. So I mean, we could always just run with that, see how we like it, and then go from there. Make like small tweaks, because I know like we use spaces, and I think Prettier by default might use tabs. I'm not sure though.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, so that's one of those things. The other thing too I was gonna ask about sorry, we'll come back to it if I remember.
How I got so cool and smart? Well, let me tell you.
That is a good question. That is a good question.
That'll be.
I mean, I think overall, like the pull request is really nice. Like in comparison to where it was, I really like the extending classes things. It's gonna save so much time when we go through and TypeScriptify it. Because holy smokes, is that nice?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because really that's probably my my biggest well, not complaint, but my biggest reason to not use TypeScript is because, like you've said before, it's just a wrapper around JavaScript. It's not really I guess it's not really necessary, because if you just have the discipline, I guess, to do it yourself, you could just do it yourself. But I totally understand that if you have a tool enforcing it and constantly like making everything literally not work unless you do specific things. I mean, you could just put .js files in your TS stuff, whatever. But saying that you don't do that, then it makes everything better. Even though that little hurdle is kind of a lot to make everything workable in that format, I guess. That's what I'm doing right now, just trying to set up the foundation for the eventual TypeScript conversion stuff that we have. And yeah.
I think also one of those things that I like about TypeScript, I think I've probably said this before, but like when people like not you and me start to use this to like make games, I think having it TypeScripted in the squisher and like our stuff as TypeScripted will make it really easy for them to call and use it. Because I mean, like you and I at this point, like I have more fundamental knowledge than I've ever had on how home games works, like the guts of it works. And still, if you ask me to like make a game right now, I'd still have to like go back and like look at what those functions take in, how do they work. Like I need to know all that stuff. But TypeScripting it, it's like this argument is a number and it does this. It's like that's what this function does. It's like, oh, okay, cool.
I also think, I agree, and I think kind of like what I was saying just there, where if I can make it really easy to show up, right? Show up to the repo, poke at it, and look at the index.js and be like, oh, that's pretty nice. But when you step into it and you just see it's like the daddy daycare when he walks in the bathroom, it's like Jesus Christ. So I think reducing those kinds of moments, like if me as a developer, if I'm going and looking at libraries for a specific thing for work or whatever, and I'm investigating different things, if I install your library and VS Code starts telling me the types of all the params and whatever, it immediately gives me like a higher mental perception of the developers of this thing and the tool as a result. So it's kind of like dev marketing in a weird way, just making your tools look good.
I think it'll be nice. And also the thing with having prettier in there is that we can enforce formatting on incoming games too if we wanted to. We don't have to, but we could. And we could do that automatically with nobody having to care. Like it just gets auto formatted by the formatter because it can run as a hook, which I found, which is kind of lit.
That I'm iffier on. I mean, it's like what we talked about before, but how much do we care about someone's code when it's going into their repo? And it's basically a dependency of ours. Like we just add their code to our system, basically. At that point, I don't really care about their styling, but we could talk about it, whatever. But
like I said, we don't have to. But if we use prettier on our side, they could just use our prettier on their side too to just keep formatting consistent. But we don't have to do that either.
But then at that point,
how would we do it?
At that point, we get into debates with our community about if it's 2 or 4 spaces, if it's curly's on the same line or not, or if it's our trailing commas okay in your object declarations, or all that kind of shit. And it's just like,
to that one.
Kill me.
Trailing commas are always okay.
I guess it's fine.
Should never be a problem.
All I'm saying is I have no strong opinions either way. You know, like, does it work and can I read it?
Yeah, that's true. It's a good point.
Really quick,
I don't want to bring the tabs versus spaces holy war into home games.
We talked about this before, but I still don't get that one. Like every tool I've ever had, I hit the tab key and it gives me 4 spaces. I don't know what the tab versus space thing is. It's like the functional declarative fucking whatever words. Like I feel like every developer is not. They're just in a whole different world, you know?
I think it's like a secret handshake. That's what I think it is. I think it's like a secret handshake because, like, if somebody asks you tabs versus spaces and you're not a developer, you're expected to not have an opinion. But if you are a developer, you're expected to have some opinion either way. Yeah. And if they have that same opinion, they're like, "Oh, bro, nice." And if they have the opposite opinion, they're like, "Oh, how dare you?" But like, There's no like real difference.
Is it?
Except for in Python. There is a difference for Python.
Yeah. Well, yeah. The Python is it's right or it isn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like a broy, like a tech broy thing. It's like, oh, I see you and you got a Vikings shirt on and I have a Yankees. You know, I don't like each other or whatever. Mm-hmm. Just a way.
That's my theory, dude.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I had one other thing on here, just a quick comment on my PR that I had, where I mentioned it before, but my state management stuff, where I have this weird thing of maintaining multiple versions of the same data in a cache, where, like I said, I have the actual source of truth, and then I cache different players' different views of it. And I guess that's a good question, or if you had asked me this question that I just asked myself in my head of why do I do that? Why do we cache per player ID? It's because there are times where we need to access what a player is seeing at a specific time, or like what's the last thing I sent to them? What does their client think the state is right now, basically? And me saying there are times I do that is a way of me saying I know I do it, but I don't remember why. But there's a reason for why we need to cache things per player ID as well. And I guess just like something to think about is how we can more efficiently manage that state of a thing changed. Everyone's view is recalculated based off of the actual truth of the state of the world. And we have it all kind of saved, ideally in one kind of atomic process, like a transaction or whatever, where it wasn't like this and then all at once it was like this. There's no middle state in between. There's a developer word I just pulled out. You know, you impressed? I was looking in your eyes while I said it. Yeah.
Atomic, dude. I got that one. That was good. There's some things that I love, and that's like parallelism and distributed design, and like atomicity is like super important in that. I love it.
Atomicity is one of those like, you don't say it unless you're committed to being an asshole, you know?
I honestly don't think that's a word. I might or may not have just made that shit up right now.
We're going with it. It's atomicity. I was gonna. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, fuck it. You go.
Okay, I was gonna say, do you think that state management, viewing it per player ID, will also help us with stuff like the mouse? When the mouse moves over certain things, like you can change what the cursor looks like, or highlight certain things. Like that's something we had talked about previously, but we were like, I don't really know how we would do that. Like the client would need to know certain things about that. But now, because we stored the different states per player ID, we don't necessarily need the client to handle that, but the server can be like, the mouse is over this button, so that the cursor should become a cursor, instead of like a little clicky boy.
So,
you know what I mean?
So the client needs to have like some awareness of that stuff. So the problem before was that before we had things per player ID, the game server just had the entire state of the world and was sending the entire state of the world to every player, and then every player would know, this is for me, this is not for me, this is for me, this is not for me, based on the player IDs of each object that came back over the network. So it was this inefficient thing where we were just blasting out data as fast as possible, and each client was doing quite a bit of work to filter out a bunch of unnecessary data and then render what they needed. Whereas if we just filter that out on the server, we save network bandwidth, basically, because we're not blowing out unnecessary data. But the client still needs to be able to know if something is or is not clickable. So that's like one of the things I added a while back, I think, where there are certain things in a game node that are squishable, serializable, basically, and certain things that are not. So like a function, for example, is not serializable, meaning for people unaware, it just means it can't be turned into text, basically, and then turned back into the thing. You can't like send a function over a network. You can send what color it is or what text or whatever, because that's just text data, basically. Anyway, so we can't serialize a function like an on-click listener, for example, but we can say that an on-click listener exists for a certain game node. So we tell the client like, hey, this thing is clickable. And then the client remembers like, okay, I just rendered some square here or some box here or whatever. And I need to remember that this section is clickable because there was a function attached to it, even though I don't know what the function is because we didn't transfer the function over. We just know that there is one. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Okay. Yeah, that's nice. Also, is the current way that it's rendering then affecting the like 60 per second outputs that you had targeted at the beginning?
I think it does based on the machine. And that's one of the things I talked about. I wanted to get like a breakdown of performance, but then I stopped doing that when I started ripping out guts of stuff because what is performance when you're rewriting everything? But basically there's different versions of that, and that's why I did the benchmark tooling where it's like the server frame rate, basically how fast is it updating and able to send out updates. Then there's the network time of, how long does it take to get from the game server to each client. And then basically you just have to think about the slowest client in there is what you're working with, because if 50% of your players have the latest update and the latest frame, and then the other 50% of your players are running it on a Game Boy Advance, and then they're getting the frame way later, well then you need some sort of way to basically make your game work for that, where like some players can just be slow and shitty. So I guess there's just like a lot of ambiguity in the way that we handle performance and the way that we target certain benchmarks, whatever. It's like, well, what if the server is blasting out 60 a second and then someone connects with an iPod Touch? What does that look like? Are we measuring that iPod Touch's frame rate on the client even though we know it's basically like not supported? We shouldn't support a device that old. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of questions to be answered there, but basically we have tools to look at how fast each thing is. But in terms of where we target something, it's kind of wishy-washy because we support everything, unless it literally doesn't run, we don't support. We support your thing.
Yeah. I see. Yeah. Okay. I don't have any further questions.
Okay. I just had one more thing on the dashboard. So basically, like I've said before, we need a way to make everything more discoverable, like when you download and search for other people's games. Now that we have this kind of game publishing store platform thing that we're going to have in the future, where store, everything is free, but whatever, game publishing stuff. So to me, that sounds like a search bar at the top of our existing dashboard stuff and some kind of, nicer UI elements that go with it and stuff like that. But the interesting thing that I think that I'm thinking about with the dashboard is that scrolly bar. Basically just the standard scrolly bar that everything has since as long as I can remember. On the right side of the screen, there's a thing. It's small when there's a lot of content to scroll through. It's large when it's not. It's not there when there's no scrolling. Like, we take it for granted because it's in everything, but if you think about how you actually make that, it's kind of fucking nuts. It's like, how do I calculate how much it should, how tall it should be, and something as simple as momentum scrolling, like on an iPhone, and how smooth that is. And it's like, oh, if you wanted to make that, how would you implement that from scratch? It's like, how do you read momentum? How do you get that from just anyway. Weird stuff to think about when you're building something like that from basically scratch. But then I started thinking that scroll bar is essentially like panning in an RTS, right? Where if you have like Google Maps is an RTS where it's like tiles, right? Where you zoom in super close and these tiles are super enlarged. You scroll out and they're small, but they exist and you just see the entire grid. And as you zoom and zoom and zoom, you see more and more and more. You're basically just getting like a view. I've talked about this before with the idea of kind of how I wanted to build one of the games I was working on. But basically it's an RTS where that giant square of what your screen is compared to the map. And then as you zoom in, that square gets smaller and it's just a scaled something view of the state of the world. Where if we have the dashboard existing as basically like a giant 2D plane, and your view of the dashboard is a scrolly wheel, but it actually underneath is operating as just a view moving on an actual plane of content. You know what I mean?
I see now.
So it actually works the same way as a game, but it's a UI element for a dashboard. And so that's an example of something I think we can pull out into common utilities for people to, scrolling content, auto fit, whatever. It's like CSS layout stuff, like how there's like a flexbox or whatever the fuck. We could do that kind of basically just out of the box layouts and styling stuff.
Yeah, like a shared utility, not shared utility, like a shared library.
Yeah.
Of like, here's some basic stuff that you're almost definitely going to want to make. So here you go. That'd be pretty dope for sure. And I imagine it would really help with people making games and stuff like that too.
Definitely. I was just thinking we can also have like different UI libraries. Like if you think about Google's material design or whatever, and how I don't know how often they update it or whatever, but I imagine they do.
Like every week.
Okay. So yeah, we could have basically different packs of UI things in the same way that there's like themes or character packs or whatever for mods for games, where it's like a bunch of trees and shit for the island pack or whatever. Or we can have kind of different design patterns and different design, like visual design stuff in each different library. So if you're going for this kind of a theme, you can take code from here or take code from here, and kind of different utilities and different things, I don't know. I just think there's a bunch of cool shit we could write. Like we could write a bunch of cool code and it all could be kind of relatively standalone.
Yeah, for sure. I like the idea of like that shared library too, because as people use it and make their own stuff that they want to have add to, they could add to that library with their own things. Like exactly like how like Steam Workshops works almost.
Yeah.
Where they'll be like, here's, a new tree for Planet Zoo or whatever.
Yeah.
Put it in your zoo. You're just like, all right, dope.
Yeah, you could put like the Yazeed button pack out or whatever, and people can add that button pack to their games and shit like that.
It just says nut when you press it.
Yeah, the nut button pack. But yeah, there's a bunch of cool stuff we can do there, and like we talked about before, but I want the whole crowdsourcing stuff to be a big thing, and then being able to just like basically be rewarded for providing that kind of stuff for people, I think is cool. We can like find different ways to do that or whatever, but yeah, anyway. Money is one of the big ways you could reward people for things. That's all I'm saying.
For sure.
But yeah, I don't have any other notes here. We didn't have any emails or anything. No more confused people screaming at us in all caps. So unfortunate.
Nice. Well, I thought that was like partially all caps.
All claps, baby. No, yeah, it was like 8 all caps in a row.
Yeah,
that's pretty intense.
Nice. I don't have anything else either.
Great. Well, that is Nightan, our friend Nightan, who does the music for this thing. There's a Wale album that came out this past week, and they for one of the songs they sampled "Still Tippin'" by Mike Jones, and Tynan sampled "Still Tippin'" by Mike Jones like 3 years ago on one of his songs on his Bandcamp. So just wanted to shout him out real quick that Wale basically took his whole style from Tynan. He'll be hearing from Tynan's lawyers.
It's pretty dope.
Yeah. Okay, but that is going to do it for us. Thank you everybody for listening. As always, our music is done by our friend Tynan. He is Nightan on Bandcamp. That is Nytan, Nightan. We have a Twitter at homegames.io. We have a website, homegames.io. You can use the contact form at the bottom of the page to send us a message and be featured on the podcast, or you can send us stuff on Twitter to also be featured on the podcast. I can't think of anything else I have to say, so thank you for listening.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.